Alright, today we're talking about the sacrum. So for sacral diagnosis, let's go over quickly how this is done. Essentially, understand that there are three things that a sacrum can do, and I'm going to show them here. One thing, let's just pretend this is a sacrum. There's three sacrums, rather. Three basic types of problems. One is that it can be, this part here can be anterior, okay? That's one thing that can happen. So basically, there's this axis going from this side to this side, and the thing is kind of bent forward, okay? That's super rare. Another thing that can happen is that it can be like this. It can bend off to the side. Okay, so the axis is, well, sorry, let me delete that last thing I did. Actually, the way they do it, this one, is they draw the axes like this. And the last thing that can happen really doesn't make any sense at all to me because it's like doesn't seem physically possible. But I realized that if the structure surrounding it were in this position, then it would be as if the sacrum was doing this, which is kind of the same thing. So don't think about it too much, or else your head will explode. But here's what's going on here. Basically, it appears as if this side over here and this side over here were more, they call it anterior. The dark here on all these things means anterior, okay? So anterior, anterior, anterior. And this part up here, like they basically stick your thumbs here and you stick your thumb here, and you measure this, and they call that the sacral base, okay? And down here they call these the ILAs, okay, down here. So these are the ILAs down here, sacral base up here. So whenever we're talking about diagnosing this, we'll say, you know, on the right, the sacral base is more anterior, okay? That means that it's more, like what we're looking at right now is the person's butt, and they're facing away from us. So what you'd be seeing right here is this little area right here would be more anterior, or they'll say the sacral, this is also the sacral base up here, okay? Sacral base, and this is the sacral sulci, or sulcus. I apologize if I didn't word that right this first time. So down here, ILAs, and then up here, we've got sacral base, thing across the top, and then the sacral sulci. So they say the sacral sulcus on the right is more anterior, or they might say it's more shallow, which is the same thing as saying posterior. So shallow is more posterior. It's kind of like it's coming out at you like this, like, oh, it's more shallow, it's more, you know, close to me, see this coming closer to me on this side. Or you could say it's more posterior, which is the same thing, or it's more anterior or deep, which is the same thing as going like this. So anterior means deep, and posterior means shallow. Okay, follow me so far? So three things that can go wrong there. So when you're trying to figure out, well, does this person even have a sacral problem in the first place? Well, the way to find that out is you're supposed to take your thumbs, and if this is a sacrum like this, you take your thumbs and you put one thumb right there, and you put another thumb right there, and you feel. You say, okay, well, you put your thumbs there, and then you have the person bend down. Bend forward, sort of like they're touching their toes, and they're sitting down right now, like this would be their crack like this. Okay, so they sit down, and as you're feeling this, and you'll feel one side, they call it test positive on the right or positive on the left. But basically, based on how it moves, you'll feel that the dysfunction is on that side. Usually they say which one moves last. Some people say which one moves first, but it's kind of this thing you have to feel to understand fully. So whatever side moves first, they say that side's positive. So you'd say that's positive on the right if that side tested positive with that movement, or I could see positive on the left. So once you figure out what side's positive, what you can go about doing is then you can perform something called the spring test. Okay, so the spring test is basically the person lays down on the table. So here's a table like this, and they're laying face down on the table. So here's their face. They're laying face down, and then here's their sacrum right here. And you put your hand on that sacrum like this, and you kind of spring on it, sort of bounce down a little bit. And it should be kind of springy. I mean, you got to feel a lot of them to kind of get what it feels like, but it should be kind of springy. If it's not springy, it means that this is rotated like this. And if that's the case, when you go to spring on it, this bone, sort of like I imagine this bone kind of hitting the table, right there instead of springing down like it's supposed to. And if that happens, then you're looking at a sacrum that is going to be one of these kind of sacrums, okay? It's going to be like, and probably be like that, okay? I believe that's what it looks like. But they call that a bilateral. Okay, so they call that bilateral. So that's the first thing. But most of them are not. Most of them are pretty springy. So when you do this, it springs nicely, and so you'd say, oh, the spring test is negative, which means it's fine. It sprung, whatever. So because it's sprung, it's negative because it's not going to be a bilateral. So you kind of rule it out. It's super rare that anybody ever has a bilateral. So that's the first step you do. So all right, we sprung, spring test negative. You can do a sphinx test too, which is basically here's your little table like this, and the person sits down like this, and then they kind of bend themselves up like this, sort of like they're a sphinx. Okay, see this? They got their arms here. This is their bum. This is their foot. They kind of do this, and then you put your hand monitor here on them, and based on what happens with that, you can determine if they're positive sphinx test or not. And if they're positive sphinx test, then you could think, oh, it could be a bilateral, or it could be a something else. I can't remember. But anyway, usually that's also going to be negative. Okay, sphinx test negative. And so don't worry too much about that. That's not really where we're focusing. It's super rare that you even get those. What I want to focus on is you're going through this, you say spring is negative, sphinx. It's really hard to write with my finger on my screen, so I apologize. This looks terrible. Sphinx is negative. So now what you're going to do is you're going to go back into you're going to try to figure out, well, okay, now I know if those two are negative, it's not like this that we're worried about. Okay, so that's been ruled out. Oops, that's been ruled out. Okay, so now we know it's got to be either this guy or this guy. Okay, I mean the dark could be on either side, but just showing one side's anterior or whatever. And do a little thing like that. Okay, so we figured out it's one of those two, because we ruled out sphinx, we ruled out spring. So one thing you can actually do right off the bat is, and this is pretty straightforward and simple, it's really nice, is you can actually just look at the vertebrae right above it. Okay, here's the vertebrae, here's the transverse processes, here's the spinous process. And when you look at this vertebrae, you can actually you can look at its side bending and rotation components. Let's say it was flexed, side bent, right. Now, since I said it's flexed, this is a type 2, so it also have to be rotated right as well. Now, what if I had said neutral there? Then you're like, oh, it's a type 1, so it would be side bent. Let's say it was side bent right. It would be rotated left, because neutral is opposite, and because it's a type 1, and type 2s, which are either flexed or extended, are the other way around. But let's say that we're looking at this one here. Okay, so we're looking at that. So if we say it's flexed, side bent right, rotated right, really easy way to figure out what the sacrum is doing. What you do is you just pay attention to, first of all, the S one. The S stands for same, okay? So that means that the axis is going to be the same. So I drew these kind of blue dotted lines running down here like this. See these blue lines? Those are to represent our axis. And so the way this works is this diagnosis is going to be something on something. I'll use black. So it's going to be facing a certain direction on a certain axis. Okay, so the axis is going to be represented by the blue line there. So we're wondering, what's the axis of this thing? Well, the cool thing is that the S here tells us the axis. So the S says it's R. That's our axis. Okay? R, right axis. So the axis starts from the top of the right side. So there it's on R. That right there is our axis. Isn't that cool? So that's super easy. And then the other one's just one step harder, but pretty much super easy too. You look at the R, and whatever the R is, it's the opposite for the way that it's facing. So since that says right, it is a left. So that is a left on right. So let's try another one. Let's go ahead and do this one down here. And let's erase what we had here. So now that I've got our neutral, side bent right, rotated left. So neutral, side bent right, and rotated left. So let's look at our S first. Oops. Let's look at our S first. So the S, the side bending, is rotated right. So we know this is on a right axis. And then we look at our rotation, and it's left, and it'll be the opposite of left because our R is the opposite. And so it's right. So this is if it was this diagnosis for the L5, let's say L5, we would say this is a right on right. And what does that really mean? It means that it would have a right axis, and that the kind of the way that it's facing, this is kind of the way I think of it, is facing to the right, which means it would be actually exactly the way that it's depicted there. The other one, though, which was, I think, the opposite, would be dark on the opposite side over here. Anyway, hopefully that's not confusing for you. Okay, so that's a cool way you can figure out the diagnosis based on L5. And you could work both ways. I could give you right on right, and you could say, oh, now I know what L5 is, because I know that the rotation is going to be, the side bending is going to be that one. So I would say it's side bent right. And I know that the rotation is going to be the opposite of whatever this is. And so I'd say rotated left. Easy. Okay, cool. So that's an easy step. So let's go on a little further here. Let's continue on as if we know that Sphinx is negative, and we know that, so we've already worked out that, and we also have worked out that spring is negative. So again, that bilateral is ruled out. Now we're trying to figure out whether the person has a torsion or a unilateral shear. So one of the first things that's going to happen with this is you have to look. They write these ones a little bit different. So we kind of looked at. Sorry, we kind of looked at. Jumped around a little bit there. We already looked at this one, and the way that appears. You see, this is going to be anterior, this is going to be anterior, this is going to be posterior, this is going to be posterior, and then you're going to have some axis going through it. And depending on what L5 is doing, you can diagnose this guy, or you can figure it out based on which side's positive. And so the way you do that with which side's positive is whatever side moved first. They call it the seated flexion test. So basically the person bends over and touches their toes when they're sitting down. And if this side was positive, let's say on the right it moved last or whatever, then you'd say, well, the axis is on the opposite side. So that means that it's a left. It's a something on a left. Okay? Does that make sense? So let's go through this as if we're starting from the very beginning. Okay. Person comes into the clinic. First thing they do is they say, oh, my sacrum's having problems. Whatever. I don't know. So you're like, okay, we're going to find out first of all if it's a sacrum problem. So you have them sit down. You have them, and you monitor their sacrum by putting your thumb here and a thumb here, and you feel the sacral sulcus. Okay, it's sort of like the little area right the inside of those the bony area, and you put your thumbs there, and you're going to monitor as they bend forward, and whatever side moves last, like, oh, it moved last on the right, and you say, then the right side is the side of motion, which means the axis is on the other side. So whatever this is going to be, depending if it's a torsion, which you'll find out in a minute, it's going to be a something on something, if it is in fact going to follow this model. Okay, that or this. Okay, if it does follow that model, then it's going to be something on something. So you'd say it's on a right axis. Excuse me, goodness, that would be a left axis. Yes, there, left axis. So now what you're going to do is you have the patient now lay down, and you feel which sacral sulcus is deeper. Okay, so you go to the sacral base, put your thumbs there again, right where they were at, and you feel, and you're like, interesting. The one on the left here feels more shallow, so it feels more anterior. Okay, shallow is the same thing as, goodness gracious. It feels more deep. I apologize. Deep. I'm going to write this out since I screwed up. Deep, which means that it's more anterior. So deep and anterior mean the same thing, okay? Following me with that? And then you go to the other side, and you're like, this one feels more shallow, which means it's more posterior. So put a P over there, which means if depending on what it looks like down at the ILAs, you can kind of figure out what's going on here. Now, if you went down to the ILAs, which are like these little points here and here, and you put your thumbs there, and you're like, interesting. This one is more, let's say this over here. If this was more anterior, then we would know that this model followed this pattern here. And this would be what we have, okay? But what if it was more posterior? Let's say this one here was more posterior right here. Well, then it appears that the model we're dealing with is one that looks like this. And you don't actually name this as a something on something. You name it a different way, which I'll get to in a minute. So let me back up a little bit. So that's what would happen if those are the findings. But let's just say that for the sake of finishing this section, those are not the findings. You go here and you find this is anterior, and you find this is more posterior. So there we go. That's what we've got. So how do we name this thing? Well, here's our axis. Okay, so our axis is running along like this. So we know the axis is a left axis. And then we're like, all right, so which way is it facing though? So if it's more anterior on the left side, we would say that this is so this is the axis, and it's more anterior on that axis. Hopefully I didn't mess this up, but unless I'm being mistaken, yeah, I might have screwed up on this, but oh well. Let's say that it was positive on this side over here. Because I think that actually this one with this axis might have to be the other way around, but that's alright. I'll fix it in a minute here. Hopefully this will make sense by the time, and I apologize if you're getting lost. Let's say this was it was a positive over here. Screw that. It's positive over here, and then what we're dealing with here is it is looking to the left. This would be a left on right. And so I screwed up there, and this happens a lot. These are kind of complicated. I'm honestly, I really suck at these. That's why I'm making a video on it. But I just had somebody explain to me, and they did a really good job, so I'm trying to repeat what they did for me, and I apologize if I'm messing up. So anyway, point is here, how did I figure out that it was looking to the left? Okay. The way that I always did it is I kind of imagine as if there was like a sacrum, okay, like sitting right here, and I'm holding this little stick through it, and I can kind of turn it like this, and I see as it turns, it kind of looks over to that way. See that? Kind of looking off to that way. And so whatever way, I'm kind of almost as if there's eyes coming out like this. So there's got little eyes looking out, and then I do it like this, and he's turning, and he's looking, oh, he's looking over there to the right. Or if it was this way, he'd be like, oh, I'm looking over there to the left. That's the way that I always kind of worked, and it seems to work for me. Hopefully that made sense to you. So let's say here for a minute, let's go back and look at this, and assume that it wasn't the way that we hoped it would be, or it was different. Let's say that we looked here, we put our thumbs on this guy's sacral bases, and we found, wow, this one over here is let's say it was positive on the right, okay, and when they lay down, we put our thumbs on the sacral sulci, and let's say that we find that this side is more anterior and this one is more posterior, and then we go down here and we find this is more posterior and this is more anterior. I'm like, oh, this is a different kind of issue going on here. So I'll shade these a little bit. So what's happening with this? How do we figure this one out? This is a unilateral sacral flexion or extension, and we'll figure out how to tell which one it is. So the unilateral sacral extension or flexion, and then you're going to put a letter here, right or left. Okay, so first of all, how do we tell if it's a sacral, unilateral sacral extension or flexion? Okay, well, what you do is you look over here where the little positive sign is. And once you see where the little positive sign is, you see, is this little square that I'm looking at here, is it more coming posteriorly or is it more anteriorly? So it's coming more posteriorly towards me. It's like it's extending. Let me make sure I'm saying that correctly, though. I don't want to be getting this messed up. All right, what I'm looking at right here is I'm looking at something that I read earlier when I first learned it. So on this one, doing everything backwards, unilateral sacral flexion, and this says it is a right unilateral sacral flexion. And so as I'm looking at this here, I'm seeing that it was positive over here on this side, and that this is more anterior. Okay, so if it's more positive on that side and it is more anterior, then I would know that that must be a unilateral sacral flexion, because it is, okay, that does make sense. So this one here is more posterior, so I know this is extension. So posterior is the same thing as extension, and it's on the right. So this particular one that we're looking at here is a unilateral sacral extension on the right. So whatever side this is on is where it's going to be right or left. So this one's on the right, so that's always right. If it was over here, it would be on the left. So that's straightforward, okay? But it wasn't. So now, how do you tell if it's extended or flexed? Is you look at this square here, wherever the positive thing is, and if it is more posterior, then it's extension. If it's more anterior, then it's flexion. Easy to tell. So there's the simple way to do it. So let's do some practice with these, because these are tricky for me. I just learned how to do this myself, even though I should have learned this a long time ago. I kept learning it, and then I'd forget it, and I learn it, and I'd forget it again. So all right, let's look at one of these things. So the guy comes in, and I may close up for this one and finish this video up later. Hope this is helpful.